Let's turn our attention now to non-declarative memory systems. Non-declarative memory isn't representational, nor is it consciously accessible directly. Moreover, encoding implicit memories involves modifications of specialized performance systems, modifying processes. It is thus relatively modal specific, that is, specific to the memory system, and generally specific to the context. For instance, we discussed in our lecture on psychology how behaviorists have this problem with stimulus generalization. When you classically condition a rat to associate the sound of a bell with a foot shock, it will not associate a foot shock with the sound of a bell. Likewise, what other sounds trigger associative responses is difficult to predict. Similarly, you can condition foot shocks to sounds, but not to tastes. Many non-declarative memory systems encode commonalities or patterns in events or in a series of events gradually through repeated exposure. For instance, professional basketball players encode commonalities in how to make free throws, basically from childhood. Recall occurs in non-declarative memory by recreating the process of the performance. For example, procedural memory encodes information about how to ride a bike by associatively encoding motor sequences. When you use your procedural memory to ride a bike, you don't recall information. Rather, the associated motor sequences are reactivated during the performance of bike riding. So let's look again at that chart, talking about the different memory systems and the general areas of the brain that are associated with those systems. So, with procedural memory, we said that the procedural memory system is associated with the striatum. And the striatum is the structure here, this kind of curved subcortical structure that goes around and is on both hemispheres of our brain. And it's particularly in this area that we find the parts of the striatum that are associated with procedural memory. With priming and perceptual memory, it's the neocortex, and I won't show you a picture of the neocortex. The neocortex would be the top 6 layers of your brain. With classical and operant conditioning, again, we have 2 different areas, right? We have emotional responses, and those are associated with the amygdala. And remember, the amygdala is this little structure down here, right next to the hippocampus. And with skeletal responses, it's the cerebellum. And the cerebellum is this structure back here, located as part of the brainstem, just below and behind the visual cortex. With non-associative learning, that's associated with the reflex pathways, for instance, the dorsal horn of the spine. If we look a little more closer at a particular memory system, like the procedural memory system, we can see here this area in the striatum is highly interconnected. There are a whole bunch of different connections between them. But there is a projection that coordinates motor activity from the thalamus ventral nucleus here that goes up to the supplemental motor areas and the primary motor areas. And it gets information from the motor cortex as well as the primary somatosensory cortex that go in here. So as you can see, it's a cortical subcortical loop that mediates information about where your body is, giving you feedback about your somatosensory perception, and then using that to coordinate motor responses. So we'll finish up this lecture with another movie. This time it's about bilateral hippocampal damage. And what we'll see is the person in this movie suffered from bilateral hippocampal damage, and as a result of that, he lost his ability to form new long-term memories. He cannot form semantic or episodic memories, but he can learn new procedures. He can do things of that nature. So his non-declarative memory system is relatively intact. His declarative memory system is not.
Clive suffered from viral encephalitis, which has led to the damage of the left and the right temporal lobes, plus a good portion of the left frontal lobe. Now, the temporal lobes contain a structure called the hippocampus, which we know is implicated in memory function, and in Clive it has almost certainly been completely destroyed in both sides of his brain. It's this that's primarily responsible for his severe memory impairment. In addition, the damage to his frontal lobes also causes a number of additional memory problems, which are manifest mostly in terms of him repeating himself a lot and generally showing highly emotional behaviour.
Clive's world now consists of a moment with no past to anchor it and no future to look ahead to. It is a blinkered moment. He sees what is right in front of him, but as soon as that information hits the brain, it fades. Nothing makes an impression, nothing registers. Everything goes in perfectly well because he has all his faculties, his intellect is virtually intact, and he perceives his world as you or I do. But as soon as he's perceived it and looked away, it's gone for him. So, it's a moment-to-moment consciousness, as it were, a time vacuum. And everything before that moment is completely void. And he feels as if he's awakening afresh the whole time.
Lovely hand you got. Beautiful, marvelous tickets. Fantastic. I'm awake for the first time. You're the first person I've seen.
It's very nice to meet you.
How long has it been?
It's been about 2.5 years now, Mr. Graham.
Imagine one night, 2.5 years long.
Well, no.
So it's been night. Not seen anything till now. Not even anything before this game. I've given the impression of being consciously awake. Not true.
He always thinks he's been awake for about 2 minutes. And that's why he looks at his watch all the time to record it, to record the fact, I've woken up, this is an important event, therefore I will write it down in my diary. So he writes, 11:54 a.m. I am now completely awake for the first time. And he underlines first time. Patience begins, because he's always playing patience. And the whole diary, every page, is a succession of entries saying almost the same thing, of first awakeness. And when he goes back and looks at his own entries, he doesn't acknowledge that they are genuine. He says he knows it's his handwriting, but as far as he's concerned, he was unconscious when he wrote them. So he quite often, he'll score out what he's written before. And so his life is an ever-repeating moment of first awakening. The strongest thing in his life, I believe, and his diaries bear that out, is his love for me. And that's absolutely raw. And each time I walk into that room, it is as if it's the first time he's seen me for years.
Good heavens above! Well, darling.
Hello. You surprised to see me?
The first time I've seen anybody at all. The first person I've seen.
You've not seen me before this morning?
No, I haven't.
I have been here. So how are you feeling this morning?
I'm conscious for the first time. It's the first time I've seen anybody at all.
You've not been conscious before? No. I've been here before this morning.
I haven't seen you before.
No, you haven't?
No. I've not seen anything at all before. I've been completely blind the whole time.
You don't remember me arriving at all?
No. No, I don't remember that you were arriving at all.
No.
No idea at all.
But do you know who I am? Or do you kiss all women like that?
Of course. You know I love you. I don't kiss anybody
Yes, I
else.
do know. I do know. You've written it all over your diary. Look. I bet you that if I look to see what you've written, you haven't mentioned me on that page.
No.
You've mentioned me on this page. My first thought, I adore Deborah for eternity.
That's right.
People's entries in the diary are rubbish. What does that mean?
I've no idea.
Did you write that?
I've never conscious knowledge of it at all, no. You're showing me now for the first time.
But is it your handwriting?
Yes, it is. But I know nothing about it at all.
So how do you think it got there?
I do. I presume the doctors don't know.
But you must...
No, I haven't. You listen to me, please, for heaven's sake. When I say no, I mean exactly that. I haven't seen the book at all till now.
No, all I'm saying...
No, that means I haven't seen it, I have no knowledge of it at all. That's all. There's no knowledge of that book at all. It's entirely new to me.
But I meant
But just use your intelligence, and let's have a comment with your intelligence.
But you put, who would put that?
I don't know, but no. Oh, for heaven's sake, use your intelligence, for heaven's sake. I haven't read the bloody thing.